It was an ordinary day, or so it seemed. Life had a way of carrying on, like a current flowing in one direction, only to be interrupted by something unseen. The car I was driving, with the familiar hum of its engine and the rhythmic thump of tires on the road, suddenly felt weightless. The world, in that fleeting moment, went still. And then there was nothing. I remembered the shock, the kind that makes time slow down, where everything seems to freeze in place. The screeching of tires, the crunch of metal against metal, and the sharp sting of impact. But it wasn't from my life. I was no longer bound to the laws of time and space. The world around me faded, and in its place, a soft, warm light enveloped me. I can't say where I was, not at first, but I knew, deep down, that I was somewhere different, somewhere far beyond the reach of earthly concerns. I looked around, and that's when I saw him, Jesus. He stood there, radiating a light that I can't describe with mere words, gentle, yet blinding. It wasn't harsh or overwhelming, but pure. I felt peace, a peace I had never known before, like a balm washing over every wound, every fear, every doubt I had ever carried, and he looked at me with eyes full of understanding, of knowing, as though he had always known me, even before I knew myself. For a long time we didn't speak. It was as though he was allowing me to take in the magnitude of the moment, to let it settle within me. But then his voice broke the silence. Soft, deep, and filled with compassion. You are not here by chance. Those words, simple as they were, carried a weight I couldn't comprehend at that moment. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words stuck in my throat. It felt as though everything I had ever believed about life, about existence, was being questioned in that single moment. Jesus smiled gently, as though he understood the confusion in my heart. He extended his hand, and with a tenderness I can still feel, he said, "Come with me. Let me show you what you need to know." I didn't hesitate. Something in me knew that I had to follow. And so I did. As we walked together, I couldn't help but feel the overwhelming love that surrounded us. It was as though the very air was saturated with it, filling me, healing me, reminding me of something deep inside, something forgotten. I had never felt so whole, so at peace. But that peace was about to change. We reached a place, a vast expanse of light, where the boundaries of reality seemed to blur. There, Jesus spoke again. "There is much ahead of you, my child, much that you must understand." I felt a shift in the air, as if the atmosphere around us had changed. A deep, resonant voice seemed to echo, though it didn't come from any one place. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was as if the very fabric of the universe itself was speaking to me. The world is changing. The world you knew is no more. A time is coming when the very choices you make will decide your future, not just here, but in eternity. I felt a cold shiver run through me, though the warmth of Jesus' presence never wavered. The voice continued, and in it, I could hear the urgency of its message. There are forces at work, forces that will deceive you, deceive the world. It will seem like salvation, a future made perfect, but it will lead many astray. There will be promises of security, of ease, but they will come at a great cost, a cost too high for most to bear. As you begin to trust your feelings and understand, I didn't understand. My mind raced, my heart pounded in my chest. The words were so heavy, so final, yet they stirred something inside me. A warning, something I wasn't prepared for. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with sorrow and love, as if he already knew what was coming. You must prepare. The world will try to pull you away from what matters, away from the truth, but you must stand firm. He paused, as if allowing the weight of his words to settle into my heart. I didn't fully understand what he was saying, but I knew one thing. It was important, the kind of important that transcended words. I tried to ask questions, to ask about the future, but no words came. The questions felt insignificant in his presence. There was no need for them. The peace in his gaze told me everything I needed to know. And when I finally got them out, the situation in his gaze told me everything I needed to know. Trust in me, he said softly, and you will not be led astray. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, I felt myself being pulled back. The warm light faded, and the vision blurred. The sensation of detachment left me, and I felt my consciousness slip back into my body. I awoke, gasping for breath, heart pounding in my chest. I was back in the world I knew, but I was different. Everything was different. I couldn't shake the feeling of his presence, the weight of his words, the sense of urgency that had filled me. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew that I had to prepare. The world was changing, and I was going to have to change with it. But there was one thing that stayed with me, stronger than ever: trust in me. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something had changed. The quiet hum of life, the mundane details of everyday existence, now felt so distant, almost irrelevant. My body had returned, but my soul seemed to be in a different place. And that feeling didn't fade. It grew stronger with every passing hour. It wasn't just a memory. It was an awareness, a constant companion, reminding me of what I had learned. The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the weight of what I had seen, what he had shown me. The visions had been so vivid, so real, that they were etched into my mind like permanent ink on paper. But it wasn't until that night, when the quiet of the world outside allowed me to reflect, that the gravity of what I had experienced began to settle deeper into my heart. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when it happened again. A soft light filled the room, just like before. It was warm and gentle, but it carried an urgency that I couldn't ignore. Without thinking, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to be pulled back into that sacred space. And there, standing in front of me, was Jesus again. His presence as powerful and peaceful as before. "You have questions," he said, as if he had read my mind. There was no judgment in his words, and there standing in front of me was Jesus again, his presence as powerful and peaceful as before. "You have questions," he said, as if he had read my mind. And then he stood in front of me, as with me, and let me show you more. This time, we were no longer in the light-filled expanse. Instead, the world around us felt familiar, but unfamiliar at the same time. I could see people, ordinary people like you and me, walking down streets, driving in cars, working in offices. It all felt like life as I had known it. Yet something was terribly missing. Communication, even the ability to control parts of their daily lives. It was the promise of a perfect future, a world where technology solved all of humanity's problems. But then, I saw it. The gradual shift, almost imperceptible at first. These implants, which had once seemed like mere tools, began to control the people who wore them. Their movements grew more rigid. Their smiles, once warm and genuine, became stiff and rehearsed. They no longer looked into each other's eyes with true connection. Instead, they looked into screens, into the endless web of technology that surrounded them. "This is the path they will walk," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The promise of ease will eventually blind them to the truth." I watched in horror as the people around me continued to accept these devices, their lives increasingly dictated by invisible forces. There were whispers about the mark of name. I had heard before, but never fully understood. The mark of the beast, as it had been called in ancient texts, was something that people would freely choose, not realizing the deep consequences of their actions. "The mark is not forced," Jesus continued, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "It will be offered as a solution, as a way to solve the world's problems, to make life easier. But it will come with a price that few will understand until it is too late." I saw flashes of people who had resisted, who had refused to accept the mark. They were persecuted, isolated, driven into hiding. But their refusal was not in vain. They had chosen to keep their faith, to reject the false promises of a world that seemed so perfect on the surface, but was corrupted at its core. "The world will tell them that they have no choice," Jesus said softly, "that they must accept it in order to survive, to thrive. But those who accept the mark will lose their connection to me, to the divine. They will become part of the system, part of a machine that cannot feel, cannot love, cannot grow." I felt a deep ache in my chest, a pain that was not of the body but of the spirit. I knew with all my heart that what Jesus was showing me was the truth. The force of gravity overstepped its field, but it was also overwhelming. I wanted to ask more questions, to understand it all, but his gaze stopped me. "You do not need to know all the details now," he said. "What matters is that you understand the choice that lies before you. The world will offer convenience, safety, and security, but those things will come at a cost, and that cost will be the very soul of humanity." I felt a chill run through me as I saw what was to come. The world would become a place where personal connections would be replaced by machines, where faith would be replaced by convenience. But the worst part was not just the loss of connection. It was the way people would accept it, without even realizing what they were sacrificing. A pack of solid gray, skinny bottles and loaded with sugar lay in my bag. I can't imagine what that would do to me. As I shifted my weight to one side of the bed and closed my eyes, my body quieted it with great skill and slept soundly with my head on a soft bed. As I fell asleep partly accommodated by the sense of peace and partly through the silence of the whole. "You must prepare," Jesus said, his voice tender but firm. "The time is coming when you will need to make your choice. You will need to decide whether to follow the path of the world or the path of faith. And those who follow the world will find themselves lost, but those who follow me will be protected." I felt my heart sink as I realized the depth of what I had seen. The future was not a peaceful utopia, but a world of control, of subtle manipulation. A world where the very things people sought for their comfort and security would ultimately destroy them. The vision began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled away. But even as I left that sacred space, I carried with me the weight of the truth. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew this: the world would try to deceive us, and those who were not prepared, who were not vigilant in their faith, would fall prey to the lies of a world that promised everything, but delivered nothing. When I returned to the world I knew, everything looked the same, but I was not the same. I could see the subtle shifts now, the small choices that people made without realizing the consequences. I knew that I had to be different. I had to prepare, not just for myself, but for the world that was coming. And the most important lesson was this: I couldn't walk this path alone. I needed to find others who understood, who were awake to the dangers ahead. We needed to build communities, to strengthen our faith, and to stand firm against the tide of deception that was coming. The choice was ours, and I knew what I had to do. The days that followed were marked by a strange sense of urgency. I couldn't stop thinking about the visions I had seen. The slow, insidious rise of a technology that seemed to promise so much, yet would deliver so little. The future I had witnessed felt like a warning, an alarm ringing in my ears that I couldn't silence. But it wasn't just the vision of the future that haunted me. It was the way it all unfolded. The people, the families, the communities. They weren't forced into accepting the mark. No, it was far more subtle than that. They were led into it, step by step, until one day it became not just a choice, but an inevitability. And it all started innocently enough. The convenience of the new technology seemed harmless. It was the kind of innovation that people had always longed for, a quick fix to their problems, an easier way to live. People wanted connection, security, and simplicity, and the mark seemed to offer all of that in one neat package. Why not embrace it? After all, it promised to make life better. I could see it clearly now, the way it would unfold. A simple gesture, a promise. This will make your life easier, your family safer, your future more secure. And who could argue with that? The world had become more complicated, more dangerous, The chaos outside seemed to justify any solution that promised peace. They will be deceived, Jesus had said, and I could feel the truth of those words deep within my heart. The more I reflected on his words, the clearer it became. The mark wouldn't be something that people chose out of desperation or malice. It would be something they chose because they thought it would improve their lives. And that's where the danger lay. As the world became more dependent on technology, people would start relying on the mark for everything. It wasn't just about security anymore. It was about convenience. Convenience in their homes, at work, in their social interactions. The mark would be woven so deeply into the fabric of society that rejecting it would seem unthinkable. I saw a glimpse of this in the vision, the first few families who hesitated, who questioned whether they should give in to the growing pressure. They didn't want to. They loved their children, their communities, their faith. But there were whispers. Whispers of jobs lost, opportunities missed, loved ones struggling without access to the benefits that the mark provided. Slowly they were worn down, until the very thing they once feared became the only way forward. It will not be an immediate downfall, Jesus had said. It will be gradual. The world will tell them it is necessary. They will see it as a way to protect themselves, to survive. They will not recognize the evil until it is too late. I could see it clearly now. The deception would not be overt. It wouldn't be like some great force pushing people into darkness. No, it would be a steady drip, a subtle shift that made the choice seem not only logical, but inevitable. The world would present the mark as a savior, a solution to the world's most pressing problems. Governments would promote it, corporations would endorse it, religious leaders would even begin to speak about how it was the key to a brighter future. But I could feel it in my spirit. I knew that something was deeply wrong. The more people embraced the mark, the more disconnected they would become. From each other, from the world around them, and most importantly, from God. It would become their new God, their new security, their new identity. It would become their new God, their new security, their new identity. I had seen this transformation in the vision. At first, the people wore their mark with pride. It gave them access to everything they wanted. They could order food, check in with friends, monitor their health, all through a single interface embedded in their bodies. It was easy, efficient, and above all, it felt safe. But soon, they began to lose themselves. Slowly, the things that mattered, true human connection, faith, the warmth of community, began to slip away. It was subtle at first. No one noticed that the things they once cherished were fading. They were too distracted, too immersed in the world of convenience the mark had created for them. The worst part was that no one would realize what they had lost until it was too late. They had traded their souls for the promise of a better life, and in doing so, they had severed their ties to the divine. The mark is a lie, Jesus had said, his voice filled with sorrow. It will promise to make life easier, to make people safer, but it will steal their connection to the truth. I felt the weight of those words deep in my chest. People would be deceived, not by some obvious evil, but by the allure of something that seemed too good to resist. The mark wouldn't be forced. It would be chosen, willingly, because people would believe it was the only way to survive. It was then that I realized the depth of the challenge ahead. The world would not fall into darkness because of a great war or some catastrophic event. It would fall into darkness because people had been lulled into a false sense of security. They would willingly give up their freedom, their faith, their very essence, in exchange for the illusion of peace. And it wasn't just about the technology. It was about what it would do to the soul. The mark would slowly erode the very things that made us human, our ability to connect with each other, to feel deeply, to love, and to believe. The more people embraced it, the more isolated they would become. They would no longer see each other as brothers and sisters. They would no longer see the world as a place full of beauty, wonder, and meaning. They would see it as a machine to be controlled and optimized. I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on me. If people were to be deceived, then it was up to those of us who had seen the truth to warn them. It was up to us to help them see beyond the promises of convenience and security and remember what truly mattered: faith, love, and community. But the task ahead was not simple. People would not listen. They would be too caught up in the comforts of the world, too convinced that they were making the right choice. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how subtle this deception would be. It would be a quiet, creeping shadow, a shadow that would stretch across the earth and envelop everything in its path. And it was in that moment that I understood the true nature of the choice I would have to make. The world would offer me the same choice it would offer everyone else: convenience, comfort, security. But I knew the truth. I knew what was at stake. And the question I had to answer was simple. Would I choose the mark, or would I choose my faith? The choice was before me, and it was the same choice that would one day face the world. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How can I prepare for what's coming?" Jesus looked at me, his expression calm yet filled with a deep knowing. His gaze penetrated my soul, seeing all my fears and uncertainties. And in that moment, I understood that it wasn't just about knowing the truth. It was about living it. It was about cultivating faith in a world that would soon demand more of us than we could imagine. It was about cultivating faith in a world for a lifetime of hope and faith. "Build your foundation now," he said, his voice filled with gentle authority. "Now is the time to strengthen your spiritual roots. When the storm comes, only those with deep roots will survive." His words resonated with me, echoing in my mind like a deep bell tolling in the distance. The storm was coming. I understood that now. But what was the storm? The world's temptation to take the easy road, to rely on the mark for comfort and security, would be the storm. It would test everything we believed in, everything we stood for. "But how do I prepare?" I asked again, more urgently now. "How do I stand firm when everyone else is being swept away?" You begin by building within, Jesus replied, his words soft but certain. Strengthen your faith. Draw near to God, for He is your refuge. Only through a deep, personal relationship with the Creator can you hope to weather what's coming. The task seemed daunting. How could I possibly prepare for such a great challenge? How could I help others to see the danger when the world was so blinded by convenience? But Jesus was showing me a way that began with the small, quiet acts of spiritual preparation. Pray without ceasing, he said. Meditate on the Word of God. Know it in your heart, not just your mind. It will be the sword you wield when the enemy comes. His words were simple, but I felt their depth. It wasn't about grand gestures or lofty ambitions. It was about the quiet, everyday acts of devotion. The moments when we choose to lean into our faith instead of the world's distractions. The more I meditated on this, the clearer it became. Spiritual preparation didn't require a dramatic change. It required consistency, humility, and a willingness to listen to the voice of truth. Build your community, Jesus continued, his tone shifting slightly. Do not try to face this alone. You will need others who share your faith, others who will support you, encourage you, and hold you accountable. The strength of your community will be the strength of your resistance. At first, I didn't fully grasp the importance of this. How could community help in a world that would soon be controlled by technology? A world where everyone would be too busy and distracted to care for one another. But as he spoke, I began to see the vision more clearly. In the future I had seen, those who resisted the mark were often isolated, marginalized. They were looked upon with suspicion, labeled as outcasts or radicals. But despite this, their strength lay in each other. In their communities, they found refuge from the pressure to conform, refuge from the lies that were being spread. And it was in those communities that they found support, love, and courage to stand firm. The enemy will use division, Jesus warned. They will seek to isolate you, to make you feel as though you are alone, but you are not alone. Build communities of faith and love. They will be your lifeline in the coming darkness. I understood now what he was saying. The storm wouldn't be just a test of individual strength. It would be a test of the bonds we shared with others. Those who had cultivated strong, loving communities of faith would be able to support one another when the pressure came. But those who tried to face the storm alone would falter, overwhelmed by the weight of the world. This is what we find, a tribunal in silences, to determine who was finally worthy of letting in the light. The choices that we faced would be a testament to the future we created. And prepare, practically, he added, his voice soft but insistent. It is not enough to simply have faith. You must also prepare your body, your mind, and your resources. The world will grow harder, and you will need to be ready to meet those challenges. Practical preparation seemed like a strange thing to discuss in a spiritual context, but as he spoke, I understood. It wasn't about stockpiling weapons or hoarding resources. It was about learning to live self-sufficiently, learning to rely on what we had rather than what the world could give us. We would need to be resourceful creative, and willing to work with our hands. The systems of the world would no longer serve us in the same way, and we would need to find ways to live sustainably. Teach others, Jesus urged, looking deeply into my eyes. Share what you know, share the truth, share the love, and share the lessons you've learned. The more people who are prepared, the less power the enemy will have over them. I felt a deep responsibility rise within me, a sense of duty to those who would come after me. I couldn't keep this knowledge to myself. It wasn't just for me to hold on to. It was meant to be shared, spread far and wide, so that others could find their way through the darkness. The more people who understood the truth, the less power the world's lies would have. I was meant to keep this knowledge to myself. I felt a duty to the world's lies would have. You are not alone in this, he whispered, his voice filled with compassion. Others will hear this call. Others will rise up, and together you will stand. And in the end, that would be enough. The light was softer now, no longer blinding, but warm, gentle. A presence that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. Jesus stood before me, his expression full of compassion, his eyes filled with the understanding of what was to come. His presence was both peaceful and profound, as though he had seen every battle, every heartache, every victory that lay ahead, yet he remained unwavering in his message. You will return, he said quietly, his voice like a melody, both deep and tender. You will go back to the world, but you will not be the same. The truth you carry now will become your mission. I stood there, still uncertain, as the enormity of his words sank into me. It was one thing to learn these divine lessons, but to go back to a world that was so full of noise, distractions, and lies, felt almost impossible. My heart was separated from the world of fear, grief, and loneliness from the moment I was born. Oh God, I was 7 years old then. I was 4 years old. My mother had said I would inherit the family fortune and be free to do. I'm not strong enough for this, I whispered, my voice barely a breath. How can I face a world so lost, so confused? How can I carry this truth when no one wants to hear it? Jesus looked at me with such love, such understanding, that I felt the weight of my doubt lift from my shoulders, even for just a moment. He stepped closer, and I could feel the warmth of his presence radiating through me, filling the gaps where fear and uncertainty had once resided. You are not alone in this, he said softly, his words like a balm for my soul. No one who walks in faith ever walks alone. You will be given what you need: strength, courage, love, and wisdom will come to you. Trust in the journey and trust in me. I looked up at him, my heart filled with a mixture of awe and hope. His words weren't just comforting, they were empowering. He wasn't giving me a false sense of security or promising an easy road. Instead, he was offering me something far more valuable: the knowledge that I had the tools within me to face whatever came next. But what about the darkness? I asked. What about the evil that will spread, the lies that will drown out the truth? As the sun rises, life begins anew. His gaze softened, and for a moment I saw the weight of the world in his eyes. I saw the pain of those who would choose the easy path, the path of deception, the path that led away from the light. Yet in that same gaze, I also saw something else, a glimmer of unshakable hope. Yes, the darkness will grow, he acknowledged, sleep, and many will fall. But there is always hope. There is always light. Even in the darkest of times, when it seems all is lost, the light can return. The possibility of revival is always within reach. His words filled me with a profound peace, a peace that I could not explain. The storm that he had shown me, the chaos and confusion of a world that would be lured into the trap of the mark, suddenly seemed less intimidating. It was no longer a battle I had to fight alone. I was part of something far greater, a larger movement of love and truth that would persist even through the hardest of times. "And how will this revival come?" I asked, my voice filled with curiosity and wonder. "How will people turn back to the light?" He smiled gently, a knowing smile, one that spoke of divine wisdom and eternal patience. "It will come from the smallest of sparks," he explained, "until it comes from the place where it started. It will begin in the hearts of those who hold on to their faith. It will spread through those who choose love over fear, truth over lies, and community over isolation. You will be one of those sparks, and through you, others will be ignited." I nodded slowly, taking in his words. A spark, that's all it took. One spark to ignite a fire of hope, one act of kindness to light up a darkened world. It wasn't about saving everyone, he was saying. It was about being faithful in the small moments, in the quiet acts of love and truth that would slowly but surely change the world. "Your mission," he said, as if reading my thoughts, "is not to save the world. It is to walk in truth and love and to share what you have learned with others. The revival will come not through grand gestures, but through the steady faith of those who refuse to bow to the darkness, through those who, like you, choose to prepare spiritually and practically, and who share those lessons with the world." I felt the weight of his words sink deep into my soul. It was clear now. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I no longer feared it. My mission was simple yet profound: to live the truth, to carry the light, and to share it with those who would listen. The darkness was real, yes, but so was the light. And where there was light, there would always be hope. As Jesus spoke, the world around me seemed to shift. The soft light of the afterlife began to fade, and the feeling of floating gently in space ebbed away. My body, my earthly existence, began to return to me, and I felt the familiar pull of gravity, but something had changed. I was no longer afraid of returning to the world. I had the truth, and I would carry it with me wherever I went. "Remember," Jesus' voice echoed as I felt myself being pulled back into my body. "The darkness cannot overcome the light. As long as there is one person who holds on to faith, the world will never be completely lost. You are not alone. And with those words, I opened my eyes. I was back. The world was the same, yet it felt different. I felt different. I felt different. And with those words, I opened my eyes. I felt divine, inspiring. And I saw Gerard's face in the sky. My mission was clear now. The truth I had been given wasn't just for me. It was for the world. My faith was stronger, my spirit more resolved. I knew what I had to do. And I would begin, not with grand gestures, but with the small steps that would lead to a larger transformation. I would build my faith, share the lessons I had learned, and live a life of love and truth. The darkness may have been growing, but the light would never fade.